Why does it say Metzion Beit Sorrow? Why does the Torah come out from Zion when in fact it came, it was given? This is a Gemara in Baba Basra. The second lesson is given that when all the regolim, the people that went up in the pilgrimage, all the Jewish people used to go up to Yerushalayim. When the temple was in existence, they used to go and celebrate the Yom Tovim, the major Jewish holidays, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. These three major holidays used to go up and celebrate the Yom Tovim in Yerushalayim. And they would observe how wonderfully particular in every detail the Kohanim and the Levim and the Israelim were in doing all the. And they would also see the Yireh Shamayim involved there, the God-fearing of all these people, and how the Sanhedrin would possibly cite questions of halacha according to halacha. Balaturim is actually it's a Gemara that the person is a bailiff and he passes adin halacha amito in a proper way. He's considered like a shutif, a partner with the Rabbi and Ma'aseh Bereshis in the creation of the world. And the Balaturim brings it to halacha, the beginning of Mishpat, the laws of judges. And when you judge a question of halacha correctly, you are a partner with God. And it's very good. That should be. So therefore, you've got to put together the Sanhedrin next to the Beis HaMikdash, that everybody should be aware of the fact that everything that we're doing is doing to fulfill the Ratzon. Once this happens, everybody else learns from this, the Yireh Shamayim. And then truthfully, the Metzion of Zion goes out Torah, because there you learn the true way in which you have to serve God, with the proper awe, respect, and the love. Asher Tosim Lifneim, that you should place before them, Rashi goes on to say. The Rabbi Shalom, the Holy One must be, he says to Moshe Rabbeinu, don't think, Lomar, to say to yourself, or think to yourself, Ashanu Lehem, Perik, I will learn them the chapter, Halacha, or the particular law, Beis or Gimel 2 or 3 times, Beis or Dura, B'Piyam, until it would be ordered in their mouth, they can repeat it verbatim. Don't think it would be sufficient to Mishnasa, like they can repeat it, but by verbatim, like they know what they're talking about. See, that is not sufficient. If you're going to be a teacher, and Moshe Rabbeinu, of course, was the teacher to Koch. That's why he's called Moshe, our teacher. He is called Moshe Rabbeinu because he was to teach the Jewish people the Torah in a proper way, not just to go over it and that's it, and they can repeat it afterwards. That is not enough. What else you have to do? I won't bother myself. To let them understand the reasoning behind the matter. Now this is very crucial. If you want to learn the Torah, especially when you will learn Gemara, you have to understand the reasoning behind all the discussion, because this is the bottom line. What's the reasoning? If you understand what the reason is, then you can you can go to the Shulchan Aruch and you can understand what motivates the poskim there to make the decisions that they're making. They have reasons for what they're doing. They're not just in the Velta room, just going around and just making a decision without any basis in halacha. They have a certain reason why they're posking shilas in a proper way. We learned the Gemara in Suvis, where if there was an onus and the Dogadak, it should never happen that the father of the Chosn or the mother of the Kala died at the wedding. We have a crisis. Here you have a wedding, you have to marry off the Chosn and Kala. At the same time, you have to bury the dead person. You've got to show recovery to the dead person, give proper kura. And at the same time, you have to make sure that the Kala and Chosn get married. So we accomplish both things. We put the dead body in a separate room, and the Chosn and Kala, we take them to the chuppah, and then they have bias mitzvah, and then they separate, and then the Rashi tells us that we bury the dead person. Then you have doing shivishah, and then shivishah avelos. So you try to take care of both areas, and this is all halacha. This is the way we have to understand. So when you go and discuss things, you can't just repeat it and not understand what you're talking about. The Rabbi says to Moshe Rabbeinu, you're going to teach Torah, you're going to teach Torah in such a way that they understand the reasoning behind it. If you understand the reasoning behind it, then Baruch Hashem, when it comes to Shaila, you can go and understand why it has to be fasted in this particular way, and not necessarily in another way. The Gemara, we learned in the Gemara, first you celebrate the 7 days of the wedding feast, and then the 7 days of Avelos. Now, if you bury the dead body before the wedding went through, then it would become on the chosen or on the kala, they become an oval. And an oval would be prohibited to have simcha. But if you first go and have the first, get married first, so they already have, as to themselves, they have a yontif. So you can't display this publicly on a yontif. Does he have somebody to...
He's waiting for us.
Everybody's concerned.
What was that chamber name?
Of course, the chamber of the... You would know, literally. Yeah. All right.
What happens with the body?
So the body is immediately buried right after the consummation of the marriage. I'll go over it again. Which, I just quoted something that you've been learning, so I just wanted you to understand that it's not just... We're just not just learning. We got to understand the reasoning. And that's why I have to go over it, not because I just want to burden you with going over and over the same thing, because Baruch Hashem, there's so many different inyonim that subject matters that you always have variety. And I like the variety that gives you interest, the high pitch. Let's go further. I won't bother myself to let him know the reasoning of the matter. On its real under explanation. Therefore, the Rabbi says to Moshe Rabbeinu, you must place it before them. What do you mean, place it before? Like a table that's already prepared for a feast. Is prepared to eat before a person. That's why they call, one of the reasons they call the codes, literally shochem table, or a prepared table. It's a prepared table how a Jew should live. A halacha based on the Torah. This is what's very important. So you can't just learn by rote. So what if you can repeat things, but if you don't know what they mean, you don't have the underlying reasoning of it, you're not really learning at any degree of understanding. You recall that I learned with you the Gemara Metzia about the different gradations of learning of Torah. If you learn Mikra, that is, the Gemara says there, it's a standard, but it's not a standard. It will lead you to very great progression in the learning process of Torah. You get credit, of course. Don't misinterpret. You get credit for learning Torah, but you don't get progression. You need not only have to learn Torah, but you have to progress in your learning process. Mishnah, if you learn Mishnah, Midah, Kavaskar, it is a standard. You do begin to get competence and the capacity to learn further, and you do get reward for that because you're now progressing further into the learning process. Gemara, you learn Gemara, which is the reasoning, which is the whole procedure of all this. Learning the Gemara behind it. There's no greater standard, no greater capacity, vehicle of building excellence in understanding of the Gemara, of the Torah, and then learning the vital that we come to that standard. We constantly learn Gemara. I remember when I was in yeshiva, most of our time was because, in fact, this is where you...
All the time there wasn't, what was it?
We had curing and... what we had later on when I was starting to be a rabbi, but by that time I was already making a laning. I was learning it in front of the road. But learning Gemara, we have to learn Gemara to the point that we can make a laning. That means you can do Gemara by yourself, without the teacher, which is a great good. And I had to learn that, and I learned that for many years, where I was able to make a laning by myself. And I started the yeshiva, and after 3.5 years, I got that capacity to learn by myself already. But I was in the yeshiva for 13 years. So I didn't stop learning there, and of course I haven't stopped since. And I've been learning now for over 48 years. So it's very important to understand that you're trying to serve God. You're not looking for just a title. A title means nothing unless you really serve God to a higher and higher degree. And no matter how much Torah you learn, no matter how much Gemara you learn, there's always more to understanding of it. And even the great Gedolim, the coming throughout the ages, argue with each other as to how to explain a certain concept. In the Shulchan Aruch, they have arguments, and they're all great authorities. Everybody's great. God forbid, I should say, one is less than the other. Of course, there are certain rules about who we cast them like, but they're all great. Everybody is trying to learn. You have to learn the Torah before the Jewish people. To Gemara, for Goyim, you don't teach it. It's not permitted to teach the Torah to Goyim. When the Goyim learn Torah, it's considered an improper thing. But they're not commanded to do the mitzvahs. In the area of the 7 mitzvahs, B'nai Noach, 7 mitzvahs that all mankind is obligated, there it is permissible for them to learn. And there to become knowledgeable in these areas. But other than those 7 mitzvahs, B'nai Noach, permitted to learn Torah. And if they do, they're committing a sin. So they're not learning Torah the way it's got to be learned. Whereas Jews are required to learn all the Torah because we're obligated all of it. They ask questions. I've had students that I've had a conservative rabbi offer conversion. And he was converted to be an Orthodox. He insisted I be a member of the Beis Din that converted him. And then later on, when he got married to a Jewish girl, he insisted I be the 2 rabbis that married him. So he says, you seem to come to all my simchas. I said, you keep on inviting me. No. But at any rate, this young man was going to Northern Illinois University, and he set up a kosher kitchen there for the Jewish students there. Go to the mikveh and observe the laws of comparative family relationships. So he was sincere. He learned with me several years. He married a lady that also had gone, and he learned several. They did that wedding too. But they were sincere. They're not sincere in their conversions, and we have problems. Because we don't encourage converts, but if they're sincere and they want to become Jew after proper instruction, and they accept themselves seriously, and the obligation to observe all the mitzvahs that a Jew is obligated, then they can become Jews. All right, let's go see what we got here. Even if Rashi says, the din in a certain din in Israel, that they judge it, just like the laws of Israel. All to be able You're not permitted to bring the law in their courts of justice. Maybe dini Israel, if anybody brings the law of Israel and before the goyim profanes the name of God, believing and he sanctifies the name of the idols to give them praise, for Shiva, to make them important. It's not our rock, the God is not like their rock. Even when our enemies are the judges, we should believe when our enemies are the judges, they'll edus over your awesome. This is some kind of a testimony to the elevation of the one that they fear. I had an interesting case. I'm a lawyer. I was in court once, in the secular court. I had a case. My client was a Jewish man, and the opposing man was also a Jewish man, and the opposing lawyer was also a Jewish lawyer, and the judge was the son of a rabbi. So we were claiming a certain amount. What was this for? It was in the circuit court of Cook County. So we were claiming a certain amount of money, and the judge said, all this according to the first mission in government, cite this according to the first mission in government. And so I quoted the first mission in government, which says, this one says, I found it, this one says, I found it, this one says, all of mine, and this one says, all of mine. This is where he doesn't have it less than half the Yakloko, and they divide it. So that's the truth. You'll divide it, you'll get half of what you're asking for. It's very interesting. Here, it was a court, but actually it was all true, and it was decided, so it worked out fine. So this is the way it is there. All right, this is the first book.
It's still what?
Very good question.
Well,
You know, yeah, I know. You're learning Sudas, right? We're going to get there. discussed that very question. But I'll give you a little. If the convert was converted by a Muslim, the convert was converted when they were a little child, and they really didn't have any say in the matter. Either their mother or parents, when the little child, it has that period to make it to reaffirm what had been done or disavow it. And therefore, they would be considered as non-Jews if they disavowed it. If they affirmed it, acting like Jews, then they're stuck with it. They remain Jews. Just like we're born Jews, we're stuck with it. And again, the person comes with his full understanding. He's a grown person. And they make a commitment to become a Jew. And if it was a sincere thing and was done before a proper rabbinical tribunal, they remain Jews, and they are just not good Jews. That's all, and they are punished. They are under the jurisdiction of the Jewish religion. But a lot of times, when a person is not sincere later on, there is a question whether they were sincere in the first place. That's where it hangs on the shadow. There was a very famous case that was decided about 20, 25 years ago in Eretz Yisrael. I think it was called the Langer case. There was a couple of people, brother of one of them, a convert, without getting a proper divorce or what it was, she married a second person. She married something, so it was a shadow where her children were, mother cannot marry a regular Jew. So these people, they fall in love. People fall in love. And you don't always know who you fall in love with. So they fell in love with regular Jews. The question is whether the regular Jews, they were religious Jews. They were practicing religious Jews. And if they were mamzerim, they wouldn't marry them, even though they break their health question. Rabbi Gordon was the chief rabbi at the time, the liberal position, and he claimed, he decided, he got some rabbonim that agreed with him, the conversion of them, and therefore it was like she never was married. So those questions were not the first instance. If it's not sincere, because every case is different, deciding different things. You can't enter into a person's mind. In the case of Yisro, for instance, last week said that Rabbi, of course, knew what Yisro was. Moshe Rabbi knew that Yisro was sincere. You got God to go and okay, no problem. But we haven't come to that madriga yet. We're working on it. It's Passage of Justice. Got 26 chapters. If you go through his 26 chapters written in English, now you've got it. And you do it, you come to Kodesh, the Holy Spirit. We haven't come there yet. To do all the things that have to be done. Then you get there. Of course, the first thing is to learn Torah. That's right at the beginning. But then you have to get all the simple things that are necessary to get to that.
There's a part of the sincerity.
Absolutely. There has to be the kabbalah mitzvahs, an acceptance of the obligations of a Jew. Because a person is not sincere and is not accepting that responsibility of being the proper, is knowing the word that conversion can be recognized as being proper. Absolutely. It usually is between God and us. Everybody has got to answer to what we cannot really judge it. Well, we can judge from the other actions that you see, from the other actions. When you went through a conversion, is very lax about it, and we have a suspicion that perhaps they weren't sincere in the first place. But we do make a decision. We make a decision that we have to make it. You see, the trouble is, the rabbis have decisions to make. You can't just stay and live in limbo. Somebody's fallen in love with somebody else. These are the children, they're innocent children. They didn't do anything wrong. Their parents that messed it up. That's the whole trouble. People do things, they don't think about the consequences of their actions. And they mess up somebody else's life. It's really a terrible thing. All right? Now let's go to the next question, gentlemen. This is just one question. We discuss it for a half an hour. It's really an awful lot of material. I couldn't possibly do it. Perhaps we'll put another session or two. A lot of things there. Bruner's not here, and Shlema, I don't want anybody to miss any of it. It's just tremendous. The little I discussed is that you remember we learned in Kedushin. Remember that, gentlemen? And remember we learned about all the various kionim, in the first chapter, all various ways of acquiring acquisitions of various things. And one of the things we learned, if you recall, we learned in Eben Ivri, about how acquiring a slave. This talking about an Eben Ivri, it was the types of slave. There was a subordinate non-Jew. It was called an Eben, if he was a male, or if she was a female, a slave girl. Now we're talking now first about an Eben Ivri, Jewish slave. He usually becomes a slave if he stole something he couldn't pay it, or some other reason like that. He was sold into slavery. So the ordinary time of slavery would be 6 years. When you acquire a Hebrew slave, and in the 7th year he goes out free without any further payment. In other words, what you acquire a Hebrew slave is his work for 6 years. The truth is, you don't even acquire title to him. In the sense, he's not property. More or less, it could be described like a work contract. He has to work for his master.
It's like when you sell land, you don't really sell land, you sell the right to produce.
In this particular case, you sell the right to work him, and when you free him, you have to go and give him a grub stake. How much you have to give him so that he gets on his feet, reestablish his independence when he's free. At any rate, when you acquire that, so we say like this. Now Rashi said in the second, that's 2 lines from the bottom of the first column, the element, you got it? When you acquire a Hebrew slave, Eretz Ivri. This is a slave that was a Jew. Or perhaps it's not. Or perhaps it was the slave of a Jew, of a Knani. Or really a slave that was a non-Jew, Israel, that you bought from a Jew. That's why you call him Eben Ivri. And in such a person you say, Sheisharim Yavo, he should serve for 6 years. Maybe that's what it means. Rashi is quoting is the arguments to try to understand what the words mean. Ivri means the slave, Ivri is Hebrew. But maybe it means just that he was owned by a Hebrew. Maybe it doesn't mean a Jew that was born a Jew and became a slave. Maybe it doesn't mean that. He's trying to say that. A further phrase, he should inherit that. His property. He passes an inheritance from master to the next master. But Hebrew is not that way. So what does it mean you inherit that? Perhaps I will explain that means lokem. When you buy the slave from a non-Jew, that's why you there. But if you bought a slave from the Jew, perhaps he goes on in 6 years. Talmud Lover comes to let us hear. If you buy for yourself your brother, the Hebrew, I'm only talking about your brother. So we're not talking about a slave that was born a non-Jew. We're talking actually about a slave that was born a Jew. He's sick now. When you acquire a Russell, they sell him because of his thievery. Moshe Nemar, as it is said, Russell. So he's sold to cover, in other words, later on we'll learn, if a person commits an act of thievery, he is punished by halacha double the amount of what he has stolen. Or perhaps it doesn't mean, or it could refer to a person that sold himself into slavery. He was a Jew, because of the difficulties he had. He owed a lot of bills, or to pay his debts, or whatever it was. He had to get out of paying his debts, whatever it was. So through Bezdin, but perhaps if a person was sold by the rabbinical Shashish, perhaps he doesn't go out free at the end of 6 years. He says, no, not the case. Follow a Jew, the person that sells himself, because of his economic oppression. He's poor. Talk about. What will I explain? When you acquire it, whether a person was sold by the Bezdin or he sold himself, in either case he has the laws of an Eben Ivri Hebrew slave. What do it mean? Freedom. He goes out free. At the end of 6 years, he's to be free. This law was unfortunately abused by many Jews during the time that this was applicable, and as a result, this is one of the reasons that God punished the Jews and sent them into exile. So all these laws are laws of God. They're not to be treated contemptuously, not to be treated ignored. We follow. Jew has certain rights, even if he is a slave. First of all, the Gemara talks about it. What does the Eved Ivri, what rights does the Eved Ivri have? First of all, he's got all the rights of a regular Jew. He's got to keep Shabbos, he's got to eat kosher, he's got to do all the other mitzvahs of the Torah. So what does that mean? You as the master have to see to it that he does all those things, can do all those things. You have an Ivri with you, an extra person. What does that mean? If it happens that the master had one pillow in the household, the pillow had to be given to the Eved Ivri, and he had to do without the pillow, because the Eved Ivri has to be comfortable. He had to, even if the master had to suffer some inconvenience. So you see, this slavery was not like an Uncle Tom slavery, where they're not permitted to oppress anybody, even if he's a non-Jew, he was born a non-Jew. Certainly not a Jew. So when you hear the word slavery, I don't want you to get the improper understanding of it, imagining it's some kind of oppression. It was a method in which they utilized a judge in certain situations, like pay off his debts. This is the way he worked out his debts, and was sold for that purpose, pay off that responsibility. If he came in alone, that means he was a single fellow. If he's a husband of what type? His wife goes out with question. Was his wife ever a slave? He was sold in slavery, not she. So what does it mean his wife goes out with him? Isn't that a good question? That's what Rashi's got to say. The middle column, second column. You see, everything here asks for questions and answers. And this is what the Gemara discusses. Every single item doesn't just go to say, read a pasuk, and that's it. There is a reason behind everything, and it has to be discussed thoroughly, and that's what the Gemara does. Before you can understand what the halacha is, you have to discuss the Gemara. Learn it and learn it to you. Then you can go to Shulchan Aruch and see how they pass it. He comes in alone. Slow, you must, like he had not married a lady, like the Uncleus explains, well, why does it say chapel? Why does it say a different language? If he came in home, something usual form of the word. Kapro is like a wing, a kap. Shlomo, the Yechidi, he didn't come just like he was alone. The Levusho, within his clothes, kind of bigdo, the covering of his clothes. He goes out the way he came in. Kapo Yitzim goes out alone. Magi, okay, we learn out. If he wasn't married in the beginning, before he became a slave, the master has no permission to hand over to him a female slave who is born a non-Jew to propagate from new slaves. One of the tasks of a Hebrew slave was to propagate new slaves. But that can only be done if he had a Jewish wife. Because we were concerned that perhaps if he had just a lady that was born a non-Jew, she might lead him astray from Judaism. We didn't want that those days he could have more than one wife. He had to have at least one wife that would make him be faithful to Judaism. Of course, the truth is, gentlemen, if a Jewish man acquired a non as a slave, Nani went through a beginning of a long period which we would call corresponding to a conversion situation. As soon as they became a slave, they went through they become converted, and they become, and in the case of a male slave, he has a slave, and he has all the obligations as a female slave as well of a Jewish lady. That means, and the Shifra Knanis has to observe Shabbos, has to keep kosher, has to do all the other mitzvahs of a Jewish slave they have to do. And when they're finally freed, if they are free, they become full-fledged Jews, slaves that are free. And they can marry regular Jews, Yisrael and a lady, not a Kohen. At any rate, if he is, say in Rashi, if he's a husband of a lady, husband of a Jewish lady, close, Well, his wife goes out with him. Who brought her into being a slave? That she has to go out. It doesn't make sense. What does the pasuk say? The pasuk says, she goes out with him. She never was in. When does a person become freed from slavery? If he was a slave. If she was never a slave, what does it mean? The pasuk, she goes out with him. It makes some sense, right? Because here we relate something, another news. A person that acquired of the Hebrew slave and the children of the Hebrew slave. Remember we learned the Gemara and Suvas, if a man marries a wife, one of the obligations he has to do is feed his wife. If he becomes a slave, that obligation is to be assumed by his master. He's got to feed the wife, and he's got to feed the kids. And as long as that man remains a slave, the master has to feed him. You understand that? And that's what it means. It doesn't mean that she was ever a slave. So, you read the word, you would think that the woman had been a slave with him. It was not at all the case.